Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Finance and the Accounting Show. And today we have another great topic that we're diving into, and that is sales and use taxes. Now, this is not a topic that a lot of business owners are prepared for when they get into business. So we wanted to bring on a returning company that has a ton of great resources to really help you navigate that part of your business. So you definitely want to stay tuned for this episode. Welcome to another episode of the Finance and the Accounting Show. This is the place to go for small business owners. If you're looking for a great way to understand the finance and the accounting side of your business, you're in the right place. So stay tuned and enjoy the episode. So without further ado, I want to bring on my amazing guest. Meg, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Terrell, and thank you for the very kind introduction.
It's one of those things where I would say, even myself as a CPA, like I tell people, I'm like, you know what, even CPAs have a challenge when it comes down to sales and use taxes, because the rules can be different, depending on what state you're in. So you need a good resource. So it was an all honest introduction.
Oh, well, too kind. And very true, by the way. There is a ton of complexity in sales tax, more than I ever appreciated before joining Avalara.
Awesome. Now, before we jump into the topic, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came a part of the Avalara team?
Sure. So I've been at Avalara just over 2 years. And previously, I've been in e-commerce, in and around e-commerce for about 20 years. And primarily in working with retailers and in the front end of the house, as you call it. So thinking about demand and merchandising, and then how to optimize checkout through conversion, and ultimately into shipping and logistics. And so I worked very closely on our global e-commerce business, working with a lot of big name retailers. And joined Avalara, as I mentioned, a couple of years ago, and I lead our marketplace and e-commerce segment for Avalara. And it's been fascinating to see the complexity and the struggle that so many retailers and e-commerce businesses go through, and even marketplaces, which I know we'll talk a little bit about, but go through to try to calculate sales tax, to understand all of the nuances associated with it. And then as you go globally, how to navigate the complexity around cross-border trade too. So there's a lot there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's just so much there. So, I mean, I'd really like to hear, what are some of the common compliance issues that you've seen some of those e-commerce companies struggle with?
Yeah, it really ranges by, I almost say, size and complexity, maturity of an e-commerce business. So if you think about, new emerging retailers just trying to navigate, how do I get online and how do I grow my business through participating in different channels, they struggle with just making sure that they're doing it right. Like, am I registered right? How do I figure out what to calculate, when to calculate? And they're just trying to get to the basics of making sure I'm doing sales tax accurately and calculation accurately. As you go, upstream to more mature merchants, and mature meaning just in terms of time of doing in business and duration and so forth, they're managing things like exemptions, and if they want to go into wholesale and have a direct to consumer business in combination with their wholesale business, there's different tax treatments. And then they have different systems. So they have an OMS system, and they'll have a point of sale system, and they'll have different ways with which they conduct business, and aggregating all of that data and then figuring out, okay, based upon the aggregation of data across all their different ways with which they conduct business, what are their obligations at that point? And so it's the same problem. It's just dimensionalized with a lot more complexity as your business gets bigger and you have different ways with which you do business.
Mm-hmm. And I think that brings up a very interesting point and a question that a lot of businesses have sometimes, like, with that complexity, some have said, hey, I've heard that, if you're using a platform to actually sell your product, that the platform's responsible for the sales and use tax, or is the business still responsible? I mean, I guess, are there ways of understanding, like, hey, is the platform responsible for stepping in with helping with this complexity, or is it really on me?
Yeah. Well, great question. And one that a lot of merchants and retailers struggle with. So I would start with the first definition around what is a platform. We talk about a platform. So an e-commerce platform like BigCommerce or Shopify is really like an operating system for your digital business. And so they are just serving up the tools for which you can then, conduct your business and run your storefront. So they do not have any tax obligations per se, because they're not really the merchant of record and they're not taking responsibility for any of that transaction. Whereas the marketplaces, however, can also be referred to platforms in the context of e-commerce, and they're treated a little bit differently. So back in 2018, there was a really monumental regulatory change that passed with Wayfair in South Dakota. And the essence of that was that they essentially said previously sales tax was always a factor of where you're physically located. So where you conduct your business or where you have concentration of physical employees. Now with that regulatory change, it's really based upon how much business you sell into a particular jurisdiction or a state, not just where you're physically located. And there's a lot more complexity to that, but that's the simplest way to think about it. And so that then created hundreds of thousands of tax liabilities for very small merchants. And the tax offices and the jurisdictions said, well, I don't really have the manpower to go and chase all these hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Hey, marketplace, I'll just make you responsible. So Etsy and Amazon and eBay, previously what they would say is, if you want to sell on my channel, you have to send me your catalog, what you want to sell, the name of your item, images of your item, your listing description, how you want to price it, and what you want to charge for shipping and what you want to charge for tax. So you tell me all those things, I'll list it for you, and then I'll take my cut and my fees, and then I'll pass you all your proceeds back. Now they've said, well, hang on, I have to make sure tax is calculated correctly, because they are personally responsible for getting it calculated correctly, collecting it, and remitting it on behalf of their sellers. So any marketplace transactions on that platform are their responsibility for. And so instead of them passing back the shipping and the item proceeds and the tax proceeds, they're keeping the tax dollars back, and they're calculating what should be collected on that particular transaction. So that's what's changed. However, as a merchant, most merchants, particularly as you become more mature, you're not just selling on one channel, right? You're not just usually selling on Amazon. You're usually selling on a few different channels, and then you've got your point of sale, perhaps, and you've got other ways that you're conducting business. So you now have to figure out, even if you're not necessarily charging and collecting sales tax off that marketplace, you still have to keep track of all of those sales, because you could be doing 10,000 on your direct site and 90,000 on Amazon. Guess what? That actually means that you've triggered Nexus, and you now need to start being registered in that state and charging a little differently. So it's a complex world, and really it's all around data aggregation and keeping track of all these different rules.
Wow. I mean, that is a very complex scenario. And I mean, I guess for most small businesses, they probably don't have the in-house structure within their team to manage all that. So does Avalara have, resources and tools that, any self-service tools that business owners can use to help them kind of sort out some of that complexity?
Definitely. And as I mentioned, Terrell, at the beginning of our chat, which is, I didn't appreciate how complex this was. And I don't know how any small business or any retailer really manages sales tax without automation and without some type of technology solution. Because it's just, you as a business owner want to be focused on growing your business versus just being compliant and making sure you are calculating tax correctly and then remitting it, to each state. So, but to answer your question, yes, we do. So Avalara has a really robust blog that we publish all different insightful articles on. And so I would encourage for folks just trying to understand a little bit more about this topic to read some of those blogs. And we also have this free tax assessment tool that you can go in and say, okay, where are you selling today? What are you selling? what's the value of what you're selling, and then we can come back and give you a report that essentially says, okay, based upon your business profile, you have to collect sales tax in the following states, and you should be registered in the following states. And that's just one simple way to do it. And Avalara has all sorts of resources, as do others in the industry too. So I would encourage any of your listeners, if they haven't, sought some type of just preliminary assessment of, hey, what are my obligations? Am I doing it right? That's really step one. Like, am I doing it right? And what should I be doing? And then you can navigate your tool options from there.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the questions I think that comes up when it comes down to, like, say, if you're selling on e-commerce, which means your customer base could be anywhere, whereas before you probably just sold in one jurisdiction, which was probably where your store was located. But with e-commerce, when you're selling across so many jurisdictions, I guess, does that mean that now you could trigger an event to where you have sales tax rules that apply across multiple jurisdictions?
Absolutely. And that's essentially how the world has shifted, because 10, 15 years ago, when you were selling in a local jurisdiction, you were selling through your point of sale or through your brick and mortar, outlet. Life was a little simpler, right? Like, you just had to worry about your physical location and your store traffic and so forth. But now, through being online, you in essence are open for business in hundreds, if not thousands, of jurisdictions, and even globally. And so the more success you have, the more complexity you ultimately have as well. And yeah, being in multiple jurisdictions and having those different rules, and there's different tax treatments for different products, there's different exemptions. There's just a lot of different areas with which you could get it wrong, and also you could be overpaying. And so why would you want to charge more? E-commerce is so competitive, and shoppers are pretty savvy. They tend to price shop quite a bit, whether that's with free shipping or whether that's your merchandise price, but your total basket price is a percentage of it all, right? And so tax inclusive, and people don't want to pay a few extra dollars if they don't have to. And so you want to make sure you get tax right, just as you would the other elements.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of, like I said, the complexity of the rules and just figuring that out now, how frequently do the rules change? Because, you may figure it out today, but how often are the rules changing, and how flexible do people have to be for those changes?
All the time. I mean, we just had back to school shopping, right? So you'll have different states that have tax exemption weeks, and those weeks change. They're not the exact same time every single year in the same state. And so you'll have tax exemptions on children's clothing or certain items for back to school, and then that expires. And so we have a team of over 300 people that are just doing content updates. I mean, that's just domestically here. We've got many more globally, but it is core to just maintaining accuracy, is making sure you stay on top of all the constantly changing regulatory change. It's always changing. And even, I was listening to a podcast of a colleague this morning, and she was talking about a change in Massachusetts recently, that they're going even a step further, which they're starting to contemplate collecting sales tax real time and remitting it real time to the government. So today, if you think about it, everything is post transactions, but now it would happen at the point of transaction. So when you sell something, the government takes their cut immediately. And yeah, so that has a lot of implications, as you can imagine, on like payment processors and transaction processors, because they're going to have to account for that remittance to yet another party. That is why we advocate for really any client, and not in a self-serving way. It's just truly because of the complexity associated with trying to run your business, and you only have a finite amount of bandwidth to focus your energy and your resources. And why focus on something that can be solved pretty economically with an outsourced solution?
Absolutely. So we've talked about some of the resources and some of the self-service tools and the information that Avalara offers. What do some of the products and the services look like that could be a solution for business owners?
Yeah. So if you think about the journey, so the first journey really is understanding where do I have obligations and where do I need to be collecting tax? And so that first instantiation of tools would be registration services. So we've recently acquired a company called Business Licenses, where you can go ahead and we can support getting you registered. We have different tools around trying to figure that out either online, but also we have managed services that will help you figure that out. And if you haven't been collecting, which is a very common problem, so nothing to be too concerned about, then you can do things like voluntary disclosures. So you can go back to the states, and we call them VDAs, and we have a managed services team that's wonderful and will help make sure that you prepare all of your back taxes and all of your voluntary disclosure information and say, okay, I haven't been correcting it accurately and submitting accurately. So here's all my catch up. So that's the first, is just sort of getting you up to speed and getting you, in the right position where you are calculating it correctly, you're registered, and you're set up to be compliant based upon your catalog and so forth. And then the next step then would be calculation. And so this gets back to your platform comment earlier. We work with all of, I think, the e-commerce platforms out there, if not, I can't think of one that we actually don't work with these days, but we have integrations or cartridges or direct, native capability inside of their platform where they're leveraging our engine to calculate. And so really just utilizing what's already out there, I think is important. So if you're operating on one of these e-commerce platforms, making sure that you're leveraging that. If you're in a point of sale system, usually they have some type of tax capability or option that you can enable. So leveraging that to make sure you're calculating it. And then, now that you've said, okay, where do I have to be registered? How much should I collect? And then setting that all up. And then once you run your business, collecting all that sales tax revenue, then you get to the point of you want to file, you want to complete all your paperwork, and then you want to do your remittance. And so we have all sorts of tools, depending upon the size of your business, where we can help with doing that filing in an automated way, in a managed services way, where you've got, human assistance, and then ultimately helping you with the remittance. And you can set up where it's auto deposit. You could set up an ACH. We could just give you the instructions, and you could say, here's a check, go ahead and you're on your own, or we can do that on your behalf.
Gotcha. That sounds like an amazing tool. I mean, and one of the clarifying questions I want to ask is, you mentioned about kind of the automation, which automation is a word that we hear a lot. So how does the automation actually work? Like, can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah. So, in the industry, we always hear the buzzword of like AI and artificial intelligence, right? Which is tied to a lot of automation. And really, the reality behind that is we've seen the product, and we've seen millions and millions of transactions. And so we get smarter at some point. And so our engine starts to learn and say, okay, we don't necessarily need all of the details for us to be able to facilitate getting answers back to you. And so we're able to leverage our learning from prior transactions. And so when we say automation, it just makes the end-to-end processing of sales tax calculation and remittance and even return filing super simple, because we're not really relying on humans anymore. It's all technology driven. So we're able to take all those returns and plot the different fields through data automatically, right? And so things like that's automated. There's no physical, completion of a PDF file, as an example. It's all just done behind the scenes.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, Meg, it has been a pleasure having you on. And I will say, before we wrap up, one question that I love asking every guest that has come on is, when you think about your experience and you think about the things that you've seen and the things that you've learned, what are two pieces of advice you would share with business owners?
Well, great, Terrell. So, by the way, it was great to be here too. And again, apologies for my dog and my office mate here. So, two pieces of advice. I would say the first is just leverage technology as much as you can. I mean, I've been a bit of a tech nerd my whole life, and I embrace it because it really does make your life simpler. So, as a small business owner, focus on what's going to move the needle for your business and what ultimately is your passion. And I can't believe there's a lot of folks out there that, think about spending their days, how are they going to calculate tax and manage their tax returns? Like that cannot be the most exciting part of their day, but maybe. But try to make sure that you leverage tools and technology and especially if you do that ROI, it should be a bit of an easy decision to outsource some of that. So first rule is leverage technology automation. And also make sure that you are building a bit of an ecosystem. And so that you have other people within your network that you can then bounce ideas off of and advice off of. And so I love the idea of a blog. I love, I have a few friends that are speakers in this space. And so I follow them, and they just always offer great advice. And so tap into some of that advice, and there's just great content out there online. And so make sure that you build a bit of a community around you.
Awesome. Well, Meg, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Terrell, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Finance and Accounting Show. If you like what you heard, don't be selfish. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and then share this with a friend, because you know a business owner that could definitely use this insight. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on the notification bell so you get all the updates when we release a new episode.